So with that, let's go ahead. We're going to pivot a little bit to a story that is both national and international in scope. And if you are a longtime listener, you might already know what I'm talking about. Whenever I bring up Pfizer or big pharma, it is an issue that again, um, us as Kalamazoo residents should be particularly aware of. Sometimes it's kind of surreal for me to think that there's a manufacturing plant literally just down the street that is making decisions that affects the health and the well-being of the entire planet, and particularly a lot of so-called third world countries that are having a hard time getting access to the vaccine. So I want to start the show today by reading this article from The Nation. It's written by Christopher Morton and Matthew Herter. Headline is, "We Can't Trust Big Pharma to Make Enough Vaccines." Excuse me. And I'm going to be going solo today, so you probably see me leaning a little bit more into the articles, or hear me leaning a little bit more into the articles on this particular episode. Anyway, almost everyone agrees the world needs more COVID-19 vaccines. As we write, some countries have yet to administer even a single dose, and current projections suggest many countries will have to wait until 2023 to start widespread vaccination. Yet debate rages as to why the world is short on vaccines and what barriers need to be overcome in order to make and distribute more. Intellectual property has become a flashpoint in the discussion. According to the large European and American drug companies currently making COVID-19 vaccines, status quo, vaccine scarcity for all except those who live in a few dozen rich countries, is inevitable and unfixable. These companies consistently reiterate a basic factual premise. They are the only ones who can make these vaccines, and they are making them as fast as they can. This includes companies like Moderna, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, of course, Kalamazoo's own, Pfizer Biotech. They're all currently on track to ship enough vaccines to vaccinate a majority of adults in the rich countries of the world and to donate and sell a significantly smaller number of doses to low and middle income countries, at least until next year. These companies insist that they would make more doses and reach more people if only they could, but alas, they cannot. Moreover, they say sharing intellectual property, especially vaccine manufacturing know-how, will only slow down production. What prevents vaccine makers from making more vaccines, they say, are material problems hardwired into the world economy. Lack of quality controlled factories, ingredients to make vaccines, lack of freezers to store vaccines, lack of engineers and other professionals to oversee everything, and so on. The scarcity of vaccines is not because of intellectual property, but because of regrettable production and distribution challenges, wrote Michelle McMurray Heath, president of one of the leading big pharma trade groups. Moderna's CEO said earlier this month, there is no mRNA manufacturing capacity in the world, and thus no way to make mRNA-based COVID-19 vaccines any faster than Moderna and Pfizer are already doing. But we doubt Big Pharma's premise. Global vaccine scarcity is not inevitable, or at least it is not primarily dictated by fixed constraints in the world's physical capacity to make, store, and distribute vaccines. Numerous independent experts have surveyed supply and distribution chains, interviewed pharmaceutical companies around the world, and concluded that additional vaccine manufacturing could be brought online quickly, if not tomorrow, then in a matter of months. These estimates are much shorter than the 18 months or more that Moderna and other current market leaders often claim. In fact, in recent weeks, drug companies in Israel, Canada, Bangladesh, South Africa, and Denmark have all said they have unused vaccine manufacturing capacity that could be brought online in a matter of months, not years, to fight COVID-19. But only if the existing incumbent manufacturers or the governments that oversee and subsidize those manufacturers share resource and knowledge and create a legal pathway for new entrants to sell their vaccines. Shouldn't a rational incumbent be eager to find partners with the capabilities to expand production, as some scholars have written, so as to sell more doses of the vaccine? Aren't all of the vaccine manufacturers trying to increase supply as quickly as possible, as another has claimed? In our view, there are at least two reasons to be skeptical of that refrain. First, It is, of course, true that these companies can make more money when they sell more doses, and partnering with competitors to outsource steps of their manufacturing processes may enable them to sell more doses. For example, Moderna and Johnson & Johnson have done some or outsourcing, if somewhat cautiously. But these partnerships impose a trade off. They require the manufacturer to share some of its closely guarded trade secrets, precise ingredient lists, detailed instructions for production, and so on. Patent holders share these secrets judiciously, protected by non disclosure agreements and other contracts that strive to keep control of the valuable knowledge in their hands. But inevitably, some knowledge leaks to the competitor. Incumbents eager to guard their first mover advantage in the COVID-19 vaccine marketplace and extend that advantage into other disease areas may reduce the trade-off, choosing to keep their secrets close and foregoing wider sales of their existing products. Indeed, Moderna and biotech have shared that they are currently applying their mRNA technology to develop a wide range of new vaccines and treatments for cancer, influenza, HIV, and other diseases, which could become global blockbusters unless their global competitors beat them to the punch. Meanwhile, the Financial Times reported in April that certain conspicuously unnamed companies have warned in private meetings with U.S. trade and White House officials that giving up intellectual property rights for the COVID vaccines could allow China and Russia to exploit platforms such as mRNA, which could be used for other vaccines or even therapeutics for conditions such as cancer and heart problems in the future. And I'm just going to stop for a second. It's like, oh no, someone else might come up with a cure for cancer. How terrible is that? This is the kind of backwards thinking we get when we start getting this whole Cold War stance. It's like, oh, we have to beat Russia and China at X, Y, or Z. It's when you're talking about like cures for diseases or pandemics in this case, should it matter which country it comes from? It really, like, again, diseases don't know borders. Cancer does not know borders. If this technology can be utilized by a quote unquote competitor country for some common good, then it should. I mean, the whole idea of geopolitical competition in the first place is really gross, especially in this public health context when we're talking about uh, things that are just objectively good for the public welfare. Anyway, second, incumbent vaccine makers might, for rational economic reasons, choose not to make enough COVID-19 vaccines to vaccinate the world. And this is really critical. This is a big reason I wanted to read this article, because we're already kind of starting to see some of the scuttlebutt going on. This point is somewhat counterintuitive, but to put it bluntly, perpetuating the pandemic is better for business than ending it. Vaccine makers have strong financial incentives to keep the virus spreading, at least to some extent. Matt Stoller has aptly described these incentives as ghoulish, and it certainly is. This observation is no conspiracy theory. The companies themselves have acknowledged the profits to be secured over a medium to long term horizon if the virus endures. Pfizer's CFO, and again, right down the street, Pfizer's saying this stuff, announced a few months ago that the company sees significant opportunity in COVID's becoming endemic, i.e., something that recurs yearly like the flu, which could make COVID-19 vaccines a durable franchise for the company. Particularly devastating from a public health perspective, and particularly appealing from a franchise building perspective, are so called variants of concern, which may evade existing immunity. Pfizer CFO pointed specifically to these emerging variants in response to a Wall Street analyst's questions about the need to revaccinate annually. Pfizer has also said that it plans at some point in the foreseeable future to end its so-called low-cost pandemic pricing, approximately 20 per dose, and begin charging more quote-unquote normal prices, which in the American healthcare system would be about $175 per dose. And again, that is only in America. So let me walk you through this. The Pfizer people, who again, you drive around Kalamazoo, are Pfizer, our heroes, our heroic folks, and I will give that label to the scientists who are actually working there, to the workers who are packaging up the vaccine and transporting it. But this CEO, this CFO, this person who is running good old Pfizer is talking about ratcheting up the price of a much needed vaccine to end a global pandemic, and again constraining supply in order to create an endemic virus that will create more profit for Pfizer, but kill thousands and thousands of more people. I really just want to break that, fine point. They are painting out a scenario where COVID becomes endemic. It recurs every year, killing people at higher rates than the flu or common cold. And they use that as kind of a marketing advantage or tactic in order to sell booster shots every year. And the big problem is here. It's like you hear some, like a lot of conspiracy theory anti-vaxxers will kind of get caught up in this, and it's like they're just doing this so they can sell it to us, blah blah blah. And like the problem is, in some way they're right, except that excuse me, the vaccine itself, it's not a placebo. There's no like, the vaccine in itself doesn't have like a covert or hidden agenda. It's just COVID is, again, they are functioning under the logic of capitalism. They're trying to maximize profits. So in order to do that in this situation, you don't want COVID to go all the way away. You don't want to stamp it out like we stamped out polio. You want it to stick around and regenerate a little bit so that you can continue to make and excise profits from COVID-19. And yes, I think as the gentleman said earlier in the article, that is in fact very, very ghoulish. Anyway, as it goes on to say, Moderna CEO has similarly stated that Moderna expects to sell annual COVID-19 vaccine booster shots for the foreseeable future, as the virus is quote unquote not leaving the planet. And again, like I just said, it is possible to do that. The human race has done that before. We eradicated polio. If there is a will, there is a way. And it's important to point out the guy who came up with the polio vaccine, his stance on sort of like profiting from vaccines was, he said, like, would you profit off the sun? He saw it as like a public need, a utility. But we live in a different day and age where, we have to, how can we profit off of, reducing mass death? Anyway, Moderna CEO went on to contemplate Moderna selling an annual booster shot at your local CVS store that would protect you against the variant of concern against COVID and the seasonal flu strain. As the first mover vaccine makers have admitted, demand for lucrative booster shots in rich countries will depend, at least in part, on the emergence of new variants of concern. Those variants will emerge if and only if the virus continues to spread to some extent. This simple fact gives the incumbent vaccine makers strong and horrifying incentives to leave people, even large numbers of people, unvaccinated, or perhaps half vaccinated, as people who receive just one dose of the two-dose regimen remain at substantial risk of infection and illness. Pfizer and Moderna's projections of handsome profits flowing from their annual booster shot franchises rely quietly on the prospect of unvaccinated people continuing to become infected by SARS-CoV-2, or the medical term for COVID-19. Their investors are already coming to rely on those projections. Ghoulish, 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 ghoulish. Would a drug company really do such a thing? Leave people to die when it has the capacity to save them, either by manufacturing more or by sharing with other would-be producers the knowledge and the rights required to manufacture more? One data point. In the midst of another slower-moving epidemic, hepatitis C, one multinational drug maker, Gilead, asserted that its primary concern in developing and marketing its best-selling hepatitis cure was to treat the largest number of HCV patients possible, i.e., it's in their business interest for more people to get infected. Yet a bipartisan Senate investigation concluded, in reality, Gilead's marketing, pricing, and contracting strategies were focused on maximizing revenue, even as the company's analysis showed a lower price would allow more people to be treated. We have no concrete proof that Moderna, Pfizer, J&J, and AstraZeneca are stretching the truth when they say that they are trying to increase global COVID-19 vaccine supply as quickly as humanly possible. But we've heard these kind of claims before, and they have been proven wrong. In the 90s and 2000s, for example, HIV drug makers based in the United States and Europe sometimes claimed that manufacturers in other countries lacked the technical sophistication to make the drugs safely and reliably. In reality, manufacturers in India and other countries of the global south succeeded in making these drugs in high quality on a massive scale and ultimately did so more efficiently than the original makers. Arguments about manufacturing or distribution capacity in the global south often veer into patronizing, even overtly racist tropes about the West's supposed scientific supremacy, as when in 2000, the editorial board of the Washington Post asserted incorrectly that anti-HIV drugs could not be deployed in the global south because the drugs needed to be administered with a precision that rudimentary health infrastructures cannot aspire to, i.e., the health infrastructure in those countries are lacking or primitive or something. More recently, earlier in the pandemic, the United States faced shortages of the anti-COVID-19 drug remdesivir. Gilead, which manufactures remdesivir and holds patents on the drug, contend that it was making as much remdesivir as global supply chains permitted. Faced with calls to license its patents to generic competitors in an effort to expand supply, Gilead insisted that such licenses would be futile. Proposals to allow generic manufacturers to make it ignore the fact that it takes 6 to 12 months to manufacture remdesivir. In reality, a generic manufacturer in Bangladesh succeeded in making remdesivir on commercial scale in less than 6 months without help or permission from Gilead and began exporting to other countries, though not to the United States, where Gilead's patents and other legal barriers prevented competition. Why might today's COVID-19 vaccine making giants, such as Pfizer, insist on the premise that they are making vaccines as fast as they can, even if they know the premise is false? Because they, like HIV/AIDS drugs makers in the 2000s and Gilead during remdesivir shortages, face real pressure from governments, civil society, and patients to make more vaccines and faster. In the face of mass death and horrifying suffering in India, Brazil, Iran, and other countries, Americans are increasingly calling on their government to intervene more actively, to use existing legal authority to exert greater control over COVID-19 vaccines. Worth noting, the mRNA and J&J vaccines rely on foundational coronavirus vaccine technology invented in a U.S. government lab funded by American taxpayers. Other key components were developed in universities. The Pfizer vaccine, for example, would not work without a lipid-based delivery system technology developed by researchers at the University of British Columbia. All of today's COVID-19 vaccines were funded in substantial part by government funding all over the world, strengthening the case for greater public oversight and control of vaccine manufacturing and distribution. And it goes on. I won't read the whole rest of it, but there's a little bit more to go. But again, if you want to read the entire article at your leisure, that is The Nation, We Can't Trust Big Pharma to Make Enough Vaccines. And that was written by Christopher Morton and Matthew Herter. And again, I'm just going to kind of finish out that topic by saying, we've talked about this on the show several times before. And I think, again, it is something that gets lost in the broader discussion around COVID, which is that the activities of good old Pfizer right down the street, our healthcare heroes, as it were, the people who are running that corporation are making decisions that are keeping these vaccines out of the hands of people all over the world who desperately need it and certainly want it more than a lot of people in America who, I don't know, think that Bill Gates put some microchips in it or something. There are countries that need this vaccine desperately, and we have a company down the street that, again, a lot of people in this town are experiencing this liberal cognitive dissonance, that we're proud to have this company in town that is, quote unquote, saving the world. But are they really, though? Or are they simply grifting off of technology that is mostly paid for by you and me and everybody else who's paid taxes, grifting off of that technology they got from us that we paid for in order to maximize their own profits? And even in the face of 600,000 deaths here in America and millions across the planet trying to sit in their boardroom and consider, if we continue just letting this virus run roughshod all over the country and all over the world, we'd be able to sell booster shots in the future, in the years to come. And again, like I said, that's not a conspiracy theory. As some I like to say, the ruling class is the ruling class. you don't need a conspiracy theory. And really, if you understand the fundamental bedrock logic of capitalism, it fits like a glove. That is exactly how you are supposed to operate when you have this idea that, like, if you maximize profit, that is somehow for the common good, and it is going to somehow help the market, and the healthiness of the market directly correlates with the health of the human race. And in this case, we see where that logic just completely falls apart in a situation where this particular corporation, by maximizing its profit, is going to allow a deadly virus to run roughshod over much of the planet. And that is why when we talk about these systems on the show, when we talk about capitalism on the show, we talk about it as something that is inherently sociopathic, doesn't have a moral compass, and the invisible hand of the free market isn't not there to help you. It's there to basically pick your pocket, or in this case, watch you while you die of COVID and to think, how much money can we make off of this? All right, I'm going to take a quick little break. When we come back, we got more to talk about on the show. This is the Hood Rat Strategist radio program only on 89.1 WIDR or online at uh, widerfm.org. You can also find our full episodes on our Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We chop up our show into shorter, more digestible clips. Keep your dial locked. We got more of the Hood Rat Strategist radio program on your way. Your only source for the news that calls out the establishment on its BS. We will be right back.